For 60 millennia, the island of New Guinea has served as an extreme laboratory of isolation. It is defined by geography. The island contains the world's third largest rainforest and features peaks that hold tropical glaciers, reaching heights found nowhere else outside the great continental ranges. This rugged topography did not deter humanity, but amplified its divergence. Over 1,000 distinct languages evolved in its deep valleys, creating communities largely unknown to one another, and crucially, unknown to the expanding European powers. Yet, even the most isolated systems must eventually submit to external cycles of power. By the mid-20th century, the island was split. The eastern half fell under Australian administration, destined for independence as Papua New Guinea. The western half, known as Dutch New Guinea, was managed by the Netherlands, maintaining a fragile existing order based on colonial administration and the growing but still peripheral promise of self-determination. This system was inherently unstable. It was not held together by shared cultural identity or robust institutions, but by the inertia of distance. Beneath the surface, the structural pressures of nationalism and global economic ambition were building. The stability of the colonial map was nearing its expiration date, set not by the local population, but by the rapidly changing constraints of the Cold War.
The system's decay was accelerated by the rise of a unified, expansionist neighbor. Decolonization had transformed the Dutch East Indies into Indonesia, a vast unitary state driven by a powerful narrative of territorial integrity. To Indonesian leaders, the western half of New Guinea was not a separate entity, but the final, unrecovered piece of a historical homeland. This ambition, coupled with the political pressure applied by the United States during the 1960s, placed an intolerable strain on the Dutch. They could not maintain control without a costly war. In 1962, the geopolitical conflict was resolved not by local agreement, but by diplomatic maneuvering in New York. The Netherlands agreed to transfer administration of West New Guinea to a temporary United Nations authority. The deal included a crucial promise. The Papuan people would eventually hold a genuine plebiscite, an act of self-determination to decide their future. Indonesia was now the central actor, newly independent, fiercely nationalistic, and struggling with internal dissent. The regime defined its power through the consolidation of territory. For the leaders in Jakarta, the agreement was not a stepping stone to an uncertain vote, but the final, inevitable transfer of sovereignty. The promised democratic choice was already constrained by the structural imperatives of a state obsessed with unity. The stage was set for a confrontation between the ideal of self-determination and the reality of state power.
The true catalyst for the subsequent conflict was the realization of immense subterranean wealth. While politicians argued over sovereignty, exploration teams confirmed that West Papua sat atop one of the world's largest gold and copper deposits, the Grasberg complex. This resource was a strategic asset, essential for funding the Indonesian state and securing international finance. The economics of annexation suddenly outweighed any lingering moral commitments to self-determination. Indonesia, driven by both nationalism and strategic resource imperative, began its ascent through careful, controlled action. The period between 1962 and 1969 saw the systematic marginalization of Papuan political leaders and the infiltration of security forces. Local resistance was met with force and restriction. Journalists and human rights observers were systematically denied access. The government ensured that preparations for the promised plebiscite would be conducted in complete operational obscurity. The Papuan people had expected a free, universal vote, following the accepted global norm. What they received was something else entirely.
constraints shaped the decisions. The vast, isolated population was logistically difficult to census, difficult to educate quickly, and fundamentally resistant to Jakarta's authority. Rather than risk a genuine referendum, the central authority implemented a controlled mechanism designed to guarantee the outcome. The system was now functioning perfectly, but for a different purpose. The critical confrontation arrived in 1969, the so-called Act of Free Choice, or Pepera. This was not a confrontation of military balance, but one of legality versus legitimacy. Indonesia strategically minimized the voting base. Instead of the 1 million inhabitants being granted a vote, only 1,025 hand-picked, screened individuals were assembled. These individuals were placed under intense security and political pressure. Known by many Papuans as the Act of No Choice, the process required these representatives to vote publicly and unanimously for integration with Indonesia. The vote was a strategic setup designed to appear compliant with the 1962 UN agreement, yet entirely avoid democratic accountability. Resistance emerged primarily from the Free Papuan Movement, or OPM. They articulated the Papuan identity and demanded the promised plebiscite. Their resistance failed strategically against the centralized power of the state. The international community, preoccupied with Cold War balances and stability, chose to prioritize Indonesian sovereignty over Papuan rights. The United Nations, constrained by the political reality it had helped create, passively accepted the fraudulent outcome. The result was a political annexation that cemented Indonesia's unitary control and formally inaugurated the most enduring, underreported independence conflict in Southeast Asia. The resolution of the 1969 phase was swift and brutal. West Papua was absorbed, its resource wealth secured, and the consequences for the indigenous people began to multiply. The unresolved conflict has been marked by staggering human cost. Casualty estimates of Papuans killed range widely, from conservative figures of 100,000 to 500,000, leading several reports to label the systemic violence as a form of genocide. These figures remain difficult to verify due to the continued restrictions on independent monitoring. The consolidation of state power facilitated rapid resource extraction. Copper and gold flowed out of the Grasberg mine, funding the state, while environmental damage intensified, accelerating deforestation and encroachment on ancestral lands. The economic engine of the conflict was now firmly in place. This transition solidified a system where mineral wealth and geopolitical stability superseded the rights of ancient populations. But the island faces a final, inescapable deadline: the climate crisis. The island's last tropical glaciers, once proudly observed by Dutch explorers, are now projected to vanish entirely by the end of this decade. They represent over 99% loss since 1850. The disappearance of these glaciers will be a physical echo of the cultural and political collapse endured by the Papuan people. New Guinea remains a territory where ancient isolation collides with modern demands, where the decisions of power have consequences that ripple through human history, ecological systems, and the very structure of the earth itself.